Move to the spinal nerves and the spinal segment. How do we recognize the spinal nerve or the spinal segment? The spinal nerves are those nerve fibers or group of axons, the nerve fibers that actually take impulses away from the what? Central nervous system, and they also bring impulses to the central nervous system. Let's see now in this particular section. This is what we have as the spinal cord now. A cross section of the spinal cord, we have this. Okay. I want you to know that the nerves that runs into the spinal cord, they are called the sensory nerves. And why are they called the sensory nerves? Because these nerves are connected to the sense organ, and they transmit impulses from the sense organ down to the spinal cord. Okay. Now, when the nerves are coming in, they come in through the posterior arm. But the part which they follow is now called the posterior root. This is called the posterior root. So now let's see a spinal nerve now that is entering into this region. The cell body of this spinal nerve, the cell body of this nerve is found in a region. This region is called the dorsal root ganglion. It's called the dorsal root ganglion. Another name for this is called the spinal ganglion. It's called the spinal ganglion, which we're going to focus more in the course of this video. Okay, there are some nerves that actually they project out of the spinal cord, transmitting impulses from the brain or even from the spinal cord outside to the what? To the effectors. What are the effectors? There are two major effectors. There are other effectors, but there are two major effectors. We have the muscles and we have the glands. These are effectors. Now, through this particular tract, the nerves emerge from this region. And what do you call those nerves? This nerve is called the efferent, or you call it motor nerves or neurons. While the ones that pass through the posterior root, they are called the sensory neurons or nerve cells. The ones that pass through the anterior, so this is our anterior root. We have to be our anterior root, and this is our what? Is our posterior. But at the junction, this particular nerves, the one entering and the one leaving, the one leaving, they both meet at a junction. This junction, where they meet, and they are actually connected as a what? As a single cell body, is called the spinal nerve. This is called the spinal nerve. So in one word, we can say that the spinal nerve consists of the sensory nerve cells and what? The efferent nerve cells. Is a constituent of these two nerve cells, the motor and the sensory. That's what we refer to as the spinal nerves. But you must know something about this. You must know something. And what is that thing? When these spinal nerves, when they travel through these particular routes called the posterior root and the anterior root, you must note that they travel as a rootlet. Now you can have various okay, let's just take a section here. We have a section of the anterior now. This is one thing I want you to get here. If this is used to represent the one at the anterior portion, you can see that we have slits of this particular root. This slit of this particular root is what referred to as the rootlets. So these are the rootlets. These are the rootlets. The slits of the roots are the rootlets. And we have them in the anterior and also in what? In the posterior. But this rootlet collectively is now what we refer as the spinal segment. So it means that the rootlet of the motor nerves, I can have the spinal segment of the motor nerve, and the rootlet of the sensory nerves can also provide us with what? The spinal segment of the what? Of the sensory nerves. These rootlets are collectively called the spinal segment. Now, the region where the spinal nerve meets, is what we refer as the intervertebral foramen. So it is the one in this region between the superior and the inferior articular facet of the consecutive vertebra. So that is where you have this particular spinal nerve. They do meet. They actually pass through this particular foramen and what? They extend out of what? The body as a what? As a nerve. Okay. Let's now talk about ganglion. What is ganglion? Ganglion is said to be the collection of cell body outside the central nervous system. An example of that is the one we can see here, which we refer to as what? The spinal ganglion. So the spinal ganglion is outside what? Spinal cord. And what did I say we always have here? We always have the what? Cell bodies. Assuming we have it in the spinal cord, what do we call it? We call it nucleus. But outside the brain as spinal cord, we call it what? Ganglion. So what are the types of ganglion that we have? We have the spinal ganglion, we have the cranial ganglion, we have the what? Autonomic ganglion. Now the spinal ganglions that you have is having equal number as the spinal nerves. And how many spinal nerves do we have? We have 31 pairs of spinal nerves. 31 pairs of spinal nerves. Then how many ganglion do we have? Then we also have 31 pairs of spinal ganglion. So here, they are divided into different segments. And what are these segments? We have what we refer to as the cervical. We have the thoraces. We have 8 cervical. We have 12 thoraces. We have lumbar. We have about 5 lumbar. We have 5 sacral. We have coccygeal, and that is 1. Coccygeal is also 1. So altogether, we realize that we have how many altogether? We have 31 pairs. These are in pair. They are in pairs. So we definitely have 31 pairs of the spinal nerves. So it can either be the spinal nerves. I say we have the same number of spinal nerves and what? The ganglion. So we have 31 pairs of spinal ganglion also in this aspect. We have 31 pairs. Now, what is the function of this spinal ganglion? What are the functions of the spinal ganglion? What do you need to know about the spinal ganglion? Now, there are 3 important things I want you to know about spinal ganglion. One is nociception. The first one is the nociception. That is the transmission, the awareness of stimuli and conversion to what? To impulse. That is nociception. I can receive a sensation and convert this sensation to what? To an action potential that is referred to as the impulse. So they call this nociception. Aside from nociception, we have what we refer to as mechanosensitivity. What is the meaning of mechanosensitivity? The mechanosensitivity we're talking about here is the transmission of mechanical and what? And the sensory what? Stimuli. Example, you can have something like a timer, like the pain. You can have touch. You can have heat. You can have cold. You can have so many pressure. you can have as many as possible kind of what mechanosensitive. In fact, in this region, you can also have chemical, that is dangerous chemicals, like when you have the spillage of acids, or you have base or some other things like that. So that's where you have the mechanosensitive what? You have the mechanosensitive stimuli. So the third aspect is called the eye threshold. Eye threshold is called the eye threshold mechanosensitive stimuli, or let me say mechanosensitivity. Eye threshold. What are the eye threshold mechanosensitivity? For example, when you have 2-point touch discrimination, 2-point touch discrimination can occur here. So when I touch 2 different points on your body, you'll be able to specify one point from the other. And these travel through different what? Two different ascending and descending tracts. We're going to list some of these ascending and descending tracts which you can have in the what? In different regions. For example, you can have another example here is when you have fine touch. Fine touch. So there are a lot more of what sensation that can be what perceived by this particular what spinal ganglion, and that's the major function. So they help in the transmission of what? They help in nociception, the transmission of mechanosensitive what stimuli, and we also have eye threshold stimuli. Now let's talk about the cranial ganglion. Cranial ganglion actually evolved from cranial nerves. They evolved from the cranial nerves. They evolved from the cranial nerves. And what are the cranial nerves? Okay. The cranial nerves are divided into two. We have the ones that are associated with sensory and those associated with motor. Those ones associated with motor are also called the parasympathetic. We also call them the parasympathetic. Okay, now let's see the cranial nerves. The first cranial nerve we have here is the cranial nerve 5. That is the trigeminal. And what does this trigeminal give rise to? You have the trigeminal ganglion. Trigeminal ganglion. And what do we have next? We have cranial nerve 7. We have the cranial nerve 7. And the cranial nerve 7 here gives rise to what? The geniculate ganglion. And what's the next one? You have cranial nerve 9. What's cranial nerve 9? That's the glossopharyngeal. Cranial nerve 9. That is the glossopharyngeal. And what does it give rise to? It gives rise to the superior and the inferior. We have the superior and inferior petrosal ganglion. Okay. Let's talk about the cranial nerve 10. What does it give rise to? It gives rise to the superior and the inferior branch. Superior and inferior ganglion. So here, this ganglion emerged from what? Cranial nerve 10. What's cranial nerve 10? That's vagus nerve. We still have a particular cranial nerve area we mentioned. Cranial nerve 8. Yes. The cranial nerve 8 also participates in the sensory ganglions. And what do you have? We also have 2 ganglions here. What are the ganglions? We have what referred to as the spiral ganglion. And we also have what referred to as the vestibular ganglion. And what do we refer to as cranial nerve 8? Cranial nerve 8 is called the vestibulocochlear nerve. So all of these particular spinal nerves, they give rise to respective what? Ganglion, which will help in what? In receiving sensory what? Impulses. They help in receiving sensory impulses. Okay. We also have motor. The motor component now, we begin with cranial nerve 3. It will begin with cranial nerve 3. And what do you have there? Cranial nerve 3. That is what? Celiac Ganglion. Celiac Ganglion. Just want you to know this. Celiac Ganglion. We also have cranial nerve 7. Cranial nerve 7. And what do you have associated with cranial nerve 7? Oh, that is the Cervical Palatine Ganglion. We have the Cervical Palatine Ganglion. And you also have the Mandibular Ganglion. Now, this ganglion are actually associated with nucleus. So now, the ciliary ganglion is associated with a particular nucleus. And what is the nucleus? That's the endigal-vespal nucleus. And that's the reason its function is actually to what? To aid the motor innervation of ciliary muscle. Motor innervation of the ciliary muscle. You can also have the constriction of the sphincter pupillum. Now, when you talk about the cranial nerve 7, which is the Cervical Palatine Ganglion, and you also have the mandibular ganglion. This mandibular ganglion now actually evolved from a particular nucleus. What do you call it? That's the superior salivatory nucleus. Then let's talk about the next one. That's the cranial nerve. The cranial nerve 9. That is the glossopharyngeal. And what does this cranial nerve give rise to? Wow, it gives rise to optic ganglion. Optic ganglion. And where does this optic ganglion evolve from? It also evolved from a particular nucleus. What's the nucleus? The nucleus is called the inferior salivatory nucleus. It's called the inferior salivatory nucleus. These are the ganglions that which we have for the cranial ganglions. Let's now move to the autonomic ganglion. Let's talk about the autonomic ganglion. Now, to be able to understand better autonomic ganglion, you need to know all this, that autonomic system is having ganglion associated to them, and the ganglions are called autonomic ganglion. Now, when we talk about autonomic system now, it will come to our mind now that we have two types. We have the sympathetic and we have the what? The parasympathetic. Now, you don't need to stress yourself, because when you talk about the parasympathetic, these are the parasympathetic we're talking about. So now, we don't need to go over the parasympathetic. We only need to focus now on what? The sympathetic. Are we together now? To focus now on the sympathetic. Now, let's see how we can focus on the sympathetic what? Ganglion of the sympathetic ganglion of the autonomic nervous system. Okay, sympathetic ganglion. Let's see. What are the sympathetic? We have three types here. We have referred to as the paravertebral. We have the prevertebral. And the third one is called, you either call it terminal or you call it the peripheral. Either call it terminal or you call it the peripheral ganglion. Now we talk about the sympathetic ganglion. In the sympathetic ganglion, we talk about the paravertebral ganglion, we talk about the prevertebral ganglion, and we also talk about the terminal ganglion. Now, in this case now, what is associated to this ganglion is what we refer to as the gray rami communicant and white rami communicant. But this gray rami communicant is only present in the level of C1 to C8. While the gray rami communicant and white rami communicant, they are present. These two are both present from the level of T1 to T12 and even from L1 to L2. But in the region of the L3 downward, from L3 downward to sacral region and the coccygeal region, you only have the gray rami communicant. What are we saying in essence? What we are also saying in essence is that when a sympathetic fiber is coming from the brain through the lateral region. This sympathetic fiber does not terminate in the cervical region because cervical region does not have the lateral horn. Now, in the thoracic region, the lateral horn is present. In the thoracic region, the lateral horn is present. Even in the L1 and L2, the lateral horn is present. But from L3 down, the lateral horn is absent. And that's the reason this one is having the gray remind communicant and the white remind communicant, while this one is having only the gray remind communicant. Now, why do we have to emphasize this? We emphasize this in the sense that when the sympathetic fiber is descending down, it terminates in the lateral horn and it gives it what? It gives it a branch, then it gives it branch, its fiber through the anterior horn. And from the anterior horn, it enters into the what? Into the spinal nerve, and from here it continues. As it continues here, what you observe is that this fiber pass through the white remind communicant into this ganglion. And when this occurs, it will either terminate here. If it does not, it will come out through this wall. It will come out through the gray remind communicant. If it does not terminate here, it will come out through the what? Through the gray remind communicant, and it will continue its journey outward. If it does not do this, what it can also do is that when it enters and does not terminate here, it can as well ascend up. When it ascends up, it goes into the what? Into the cervical region to form a ganglion here. When it enters into the cervical region, then it will what? It will come out through the what? It will come out through the gray remind communicant and enter into the what? Into the anterior ramus of the cervical region. It can as well ascend upward. If it does ascend upward, it will enter into the what? The next cervical region, and continually like that to have from C1 to C8. Meaning that from C1 to C8, they do not have the what? They do not have the sympathetic fiber, but they receive their sympathetic fiber from what? From the first thoracic region by ascending upward. The C1, C2, C3, and C4, they join together. They form what we refer to as superior cervical ganglion. The superior cervical ganglion. In the region of C5, C6, these two join together to form the middle cervical ganglion. And C7 and C8, they form inferior cervical ganglion. This is how the cervical ganglion of the paravertebral ganglion is actually formed. And that's the reason it's also called another name. What's that name? It is called the sympathetic chain ganglion. Why is it called a chain? Because we believe that this ganglion is connected to this ganglion, is connected to the lower ganglion, is connected to the upper ganglion through the what? The ascending and even the descending fibers. Okay, the same thing occurs here. Now, this is it. The sympathetic fiber comes out to the anterior root, and as it comes out to the anterior root, it then follow up with what? With the spinal nerve. It enter into the what? Through the white remind communicant, and it leads to the what? Gray remind communicant. It continues its journey outside. Now, this sympathetic fiber can actually terminate outside this particular spinal nerve. And this particular ganglion here is called the prevertebral ganglion. That is, it is not found within the chain at all. It goes out to form another what? Ganglion. And this ganglion is away from the vertebra. That's why it's called the prevertebral ganglion. Okay, in the lumbar region, this particular region does not have this particular region does not have lateral horn. And as a result of this, the sympathetic fiber cannot come out through this region. Instead, fiber descend from what? From the thoracic, or from the L2 vertebra. You know, we said we have it in L2 section 2. From the L2, and as it descends in the L2, it enters in through this particular region and enter the comunicant, and what? It continue its journey outside through the spinal nerve. And as a result of this, it might not also terminate here. Instead, it can continue to form what we refer to as the prevertebral ganglion. It can also come out to form the prevertebral ganglion. And when this is formed, you can have the prevertebral ganglion to be formed. You can still have some of this particular fiber that will not terminate here from the thoracic region. They will not terminate in this prevertebral ganglion. Instead, they will continue now and go very much close to the viscera that which the what innervates. This can be the heart, for example, and goes very close to the what? To the organ that which they innervates. They will call them the terminal ganglion. So this is a terminal ganglion, this is a prevertebral ganglion, and this one we have here is called what? We call it the paravertebral ganglion. Now I want to tell you this. This is the reason the sympathetic chain or the sympathetic fiber, they are also called the thoracolumbar segment. The reason they are called the thoracolumbar segment is because you only have the outflow in the what? In the thoracic and in the lumbar. Remember I told you L1 and L2 lumbar. Remember I told you that in the cervical you don't have the sympathetic outflow. In the L3 below, you don't have the what? Sympathetic outflow. Not even in the sacral region, you don't have the sympathetic outflow. So, assuming this can be used to represent L1 and L2 now, let's say that this is from L1 and L2, you can also have this outflow. But below this, you cannot have the outflow. That's why I call it the thoracolumbar segment. Thoracolumbar. So the outflow does not come out in the cervical, and the outflow does not come out in the sacral. It doesn't. So this is what we're talking about concerning the what? Concerning the sympathetic ganglion. So we have the types of the prevertebral ganglion. What are the types of prevertebral ganglion? Here you have, what are they? We have referred to as the celiac ganglion. We also have what referred to as superior mesenteric ganglion. Superior mesenteric ganglion. And the last one there is the inferior mesenteric ganglion. Inferior mesenteric ganglion. So these are the ganglions which you have typically. These are the ganglions.